Hi, I'm Susan Navarre from the Fitchburg Historical Society, and welcome to I Remember When with the Fitchburg Historical Society, a 30-minute program on Fitchburg history.
It's kind of an interesting story. His first ancestor who had a historical record here in Fitchburg was a David Pratt, who apparently had acquired property in the area that we now consider Upper Cleghorn in about 1778. And he operated it as a farm. I imagine he had to clear the property because that was pretty early on in the history of the area. And it passed through several generations before it reached Andrew. By the time it did reach Andrew, it had been dispersed throughout his family, and he did reacquire a number of properties to try to develop an area of land that would be of interest to people. Andrew, when he first started to develop that property, I think he was rather undecided from what I could see what he was going to do, because it was before Pratt had really come into, not Pratt, I'm sorry, before Cleghorn had come into town. And he had this property, and there wasn't a big demand for it at that time. I think he was looking for an opportunity. So when Cleghorn did come in and started talking about developing a mill site, that was a prime interest to Andrew. It was very remote. Yeah. There were almost no structures there. From what I've been able to tell, there was only, in the whole area of what is now Cleghorn, there was only 3 or 4 houses, and they were spread out. It was almost nobody. There was none of the streets were developed. Pratt was what we now call Pratt Road. Franklin was another street that was in effect. It wasn't used that way. It was part of the stagecoach route.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that makes sense. It cuts right across.
It cuts right across. There were not a lot of people living there. So he had property, and he was looking for a way to develop it. And when Cleghorn came into town, into Cleghorn, his opportunity presented itself. And he stepped up to the plate. And it was interesting, too, with Andrew Cleghorn. When he first came into town, he actually had been a Scottish immigrant. He lived out in Adams and North Adams, Mass. He'd been in this country since 1848. He didn't show up into Fitchburg until 1885. So he was in this country for quite a little while, and he was developing businesses with other relatives out in the Adams and North Adams area. His brother-in-law, John Parkhill,
brother-in-law.
Was his brother-in-law. And Parkhill was already here, and he had already started his manufacturing business here in town. And I think he's the one who put the idea into Andrew Cleghorn's mind that there was opportunities with the water power here in town to be able to start a business. His career in his early education, which was on-the-job training, was in the textiles, particularly gingham, cotton cloth. That he was very knowledgeable. And so when his brother-in-law approached him about starting a mill, He saw the opportunities. It's interesting because Cleghorn was not in town that long. I think the first time he spoke with his brother and several other investors about starting a mill was like in 1882, 1883. They built the mill in 85, and by 1889 he had sold it to his brother-in-law, and he moved back to North Adams. He was only in town for 4 or 5 years. They both immigrated from Scotland in 1848. They immigrated together. There was a lot of turmoil.
Yeah.
There was a lot of turmoil. And there was a lot of, because of weather conditions, there was a lot of famine too. People don't really associate that with Europe. But that was during the era of the potato famines in Ireland. It was a very tumultuous period in European history, and a lot of people came over here. Yeah, my own family immigrated during that period. They went from Scotland to Northern Ireland. During the potato famine hit, they went to Canada. So that was pretty common. After the mill started, quite a few of the people who were mill workers built their homes in that area. And when we're talking about Cleghorn, it was not what we consider lower Cleghorn now, where the mill was. It was up by Pratt Road.
Really?
That's where it was located. The original settlement is near where Pratt Road is now, and the people walked to pastures and fields. There were trails that have become roads now, like Clarendon Street was originally a cow path. Yeah, they were individual homes. The triple deckers didn't really start becoming prominent until a few years after that. But the reason why that name Cleghorn came up for that area is because these two people were working in Cleghorn Mill, and the people who lived here in town already started referring to them as Cleghorn's Canadians. Pretty soon the Canadian part dropped off, and they just called it Cleghorn.
Did they ever call it Little Quebec?
Well, they did, but that period didn't last long. I don't think it was more than a couple of years. From like 1888 to 1890, right around there. From about 1890 on, it was commonly referred to as Cleghorn.
Yeah, so in some ways it's
And he was already gone.
It's not actually Cleghorn employees.
Yeah, they were working at Cleghorn Mill.
Wow.
It really wasn't a direct association with the man himself, because he was already gone.
You were French Canadian.
Yes.
And so it's interesting. There was the cow path question. You talked all about that, about that it was the lane, the cow path, and it eventually became Clarendon Street. So what I read was that the number of mills right on the river expanded really quickly. That you had Cleghorn's Mill, you had Park Hill Mill,
Yep.
You had the Mitchell Mills, and the Fitchburg Steam Engine Company. They say, and it said they said Park Hill was at the foot of Fairmount, and they said there at Park Hill they actually did the entire manufacturing process, from raw material to finished cloth.
Yep.
They said just incredibly diverse under that one roof, and that it was world renowned for the gingham cloth. And they were saying that Cleghorn brought that in, that he had experience.
Right, that was his background when he came to this country, when he immigrated from Scotland.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that, and actually when we talk about it, I'll show, we have all these pictures of women from Fitchburg in the 19th century wearing gingham dresses and gingham shirts and things, and blouses.
You're right, the material from here was world renowned. In fact, their fabric won awards at some world fairs for the quality of the fabric that was coming out of the mills here. So it had a very good reputation internationally even.
Yeah, yeah. Might record that again with the stuff. So one of the, so actually, can you talk about like, so one thing, I think a lot of people who don't sew or, are removed from textile manufacturing don't really understand what gingham is. I mean, you picture it as being little squares that, on Gilligan's Island that Marianne wore. But can you talk about what it is that makes it gingham?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the quality of the thread that they were using, the thread counts, how densely the thread is packed when you're weaving the material, the patterns that they're using in the fabric itself. I don't know the specific technical aspects of what's classified as a gingham, but I know that those are the aspects that they're looking at when they're developing gingham. And it's the weight of the material also. Because, I mean, for cotton material, there's all kinds of weights of cotton material, all the way from canvas stuff like they were making in South Fitchburg, all the way to best quality ginghams that were relatively light compared to the duck they were weaving in South Fitchburg. So a lot of it has to do with thread count, the thickness of the threads that they're using, the type of patterns that they're weaving.
I didn't think of that, but we do notice that it's very fine.
Yep.
Yes. That it's light.
It is.
Yep.
Not something rough.
It's considered a fine fabric.
And I think the biggest thing is that it's funny because it's often not just square checks, but like patterns of plaid and things, right? Because it's actually woven.
That's woven
Yep.
right into
Yep.
the fabric, correct? Yeah, it was interesting. I think Cleghorn, the mill, I think they had an L on the side of the building where I think they dyed the material there too. I think they actually did some of that themselves. I often wonder, how did all these people get down here so fast?
They had
They came down the railroad.
the railroad, but they also had some of those recruiters going up to Canada,
Yeah, they-
trying to lure people to come down.
Yeah. And they were using the railroads for transportation.
Correct. Yep.
That's how they got so many people down here in big numbers.
Yes.
So rapidly.
Yeah.
And I never really thought about railroad transportation between New England and Canada. I always thought of it going out to the Great Lakes. But back then, there was a lot of railroad transportation back and forth.
I think the big predominant one, and you'll have to correct me, somebody might want to look it up, but I think it was the Grand Trunk Railroad line. It was in Canada and to most of the New England states, like that brought people down south. I don't know too much about it. I know they were up there trying to entice people to come to the States to work in the factories because they'd make more, obviously, than farming, and it was more of a stable income, but I'm not sure exactly if they gave them a little stipend to come down or if they just had to find their own means.
Children did start young. As young as 10 years of age, they were working in the mills.
Yeah, and a
And
few things.
they had large families.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Have you found any records from your own family, Carrie, where you get any sense of how early they started working?
I don't have any specific records for my family other than this, an apprenticeship paper. I have the actual apprenticeship paper for the Fitchburg Steam Company, but it was for my great-grandfather, and it would have been, I think he was of working age, so to speak. I think it was 16, 17 years old. But his mother actually co-signed that apprenticeship paper for him to start working, and it gave the different rates you would start, year 1, year 2, so forth. The only other thing that I have, I think I had discussed with you before, was my grandfather, who worked as a bobbin spinner at, I think it was 8th grade, so what, 13-ish years old, 12, 13 years old, as a bobbin spinner at the Wattaquatic Mills. So that would be the only other reference I would have to somebody at a younger age starting, but that's really not young considering 10 years old.
I read an article, there was this one person who was acting as an agent, hiring people to work in some of the mills, and apparently there was, I don't know if it was a state law, but there was some requirement that you couldn't hire children under 10 years of age. And he said all of a sudden, every house he went into, all the kids were at least 10 years of age.
I saw that in our record.
Suppose if you were tall enough, you could qualify.
But it was not a company like your great grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
I've read people too. They were 12, 13 years of age. A lot of people they'd finished a freshman year in high school, and that was it.
Yep.
They were working in the mills after that.
My grandfather, my great-grandfather, the same one that did the Fitchburg steam engine, he was a machinist. My grandfather was a machinist, and his father before him was, he worked for the Ivor Johnson Company as a machinist, so it just went down the line.
And we picture it, we're like, oh no, not that we would want to go back to, 7-year-olds working in a heavy industry. But there were ways that they weren't being monsters or anything. Like there were certain jobs, and there were definitely, health disadvantages and things, but they knew that they would give jobs to younger kids that younger kids could do.
Yes.
It wasn't that they were carrying around 50, 100-pound bales or anything. They were doing little things that little fingers could do, even though it was exhausting and tiring. But there are records of people, how much they got to chat and stuff while they're waiting for the machines to do the things that they're, doing the work that they're doing until it's time to attach new
And
threads.
particularly like in mass production, like in weaving and things like that, there were jobs where if you didn't have someone there staying like a child to do a relatively trivial aspect of the job, that you were taking time away from someone on production to be able to do that function.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So these children were really serving useful purposes as far as production went. And there were some things that they were particularly good at because particularly in looms, things like that, a lot of places it was a tight work area. And children, their arms are smaller, they could get into tight places where an adult would have a difficult time sometimes.
Yep.
So they served a function. I mean, it wouldn't be looked upon well now, but back then it served a purpose for everybody.
Probably to some degree a little bit of child endangerment, depending upon whatever the task was.
And there was, there's no question about it.
There's no question, yeah.
Well, this is well before OSHA.
Oh yes, definitely. Oh, here it is on the back. Looking up west towards West Fitchburg from Federal Street.
I'm surprised for 1888 that so much had built up there in 4 years, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Because the mill itself, Cleghorn mill itself, the first one, didn't open until I think it was the end of the year in 1885.
Wow.
So, and this is only 3 years later, these photographs.
I was going to mention too, and you guys, when I came in, you were talking about 3-deckers or whatever, some sort of housing. There was a term, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, what they talked about, people just throwing up 3-deckers. There was like a specific term for those folks that were putting them up
Jerry
in...
builders?
Yes.
What was it?
Jerry builders.
Oh, right.
That popped in my head. I walked in and that's what you're talking about. And I'm like, I don't remember what it was called, but that was something.
There was one point, there was one point in time, I think they had 12 or 13 people, and they were living in a 3-bedroom house with 1 bath. I'm thinking, oh my word,
It's crazy. I mean, to think about that.
When we think about Cleghorn and it being developed, and we think about it being a certain point in history, back in history.
Yep.
When in reality, the people that were involved in that, they were alive not that long ago.
Yep.
For example, Andrew Pratt, who developed the area we were just talking about, he died in 1940. That's not that long ago.
No, it's not.
I mean, it was like 9 years before I was born.
Right.
I'm thinking, I always seem to think of history as being a removed period of time, and it's not really sometimes.
Like the Cleghorn itself, its peak, and it's kind of like changing demographics. I mean, I think I've read in several articles here, like after World War II, primarily, that's kind of when guys and girls went out, they were serving their country, they came back, and it's like, well, why do we have to stay in this little confined little community? We can kind of go or live wherever we want. So that was kind of like, not right away, but kind of the pinnacle or turning point for Cleghorn when it started kind of going. That was kind of past its heyday, I guess. The peak of the heyday, I guess you could say, sort of, so to speak.
And I think another thing that fed into that was the GI Bill when people came home.
Correct.
All of a sudden they had access to money.
Yep. And education and
education. And prior to, First World War in particular, the main means of transportation was walking. People lived within walking distance of work. The automobile changed all that.
Of course.
Cars get where you want, and then that I think made another problem for Cleghorn. Where do we park?
Yeah, where do we
Everybody
park?
wants a car.
Yeah, you've got 20 or 30 people living in a triple decker that had no parking. You got a problem when everyone's got an automobile. Yeah, and this team's actually built for people to be able to walk to work.
Yep. And shop.
There's a lot of places around town where there are granite stairways up and down the hills between streets so people could walk to work. There are footbridges over the river. In a lot of places in town, the remnants of the footbridges are still there.
It was just, I mean, even the Cleghorn Square. I mean, you have the square. There was numerous stores and buildings, that they could eat, they could shop. I mean, why do you have to leave? Everything's in walking distance. You got the church, the stores, the houses. Everything's boom right there.
Yeah, and I've got a couple of things interesting lately about the church in Cleghorn, St. Joseph's. It was amazing how rapidly that became a real center, civic, not just a religious center, but a civic center for the town.
It really was. Yep. With the societies, plus the sports, plus the St. Joseph's Club, which basically endorsed the school.
Yeah. Well, and you keep running across that, don't you, Carrie? With like in the history of St. Joseph's, they list all these community groups.
Yes, I'm compiling that now, but I mean, I'm kind of impartial to St. Joseph's because my entire family is pretty much either baptized or married, or so I'm kind of a little impartial towards that parish specifically, but. But they were very involved with the social life of the community. I mean, they were kind of the heartbeat, if you want to call it that, so to speak. If it wasn't a church organization, it might have been some other social organization, but a lot of times they would rent space at the church or something like that.
So you kept running across a lot of the same names, or in the leadership of the different clubs. I'm trying to think of the.
Well, there's I don't know if you want to focus on just names or societies. A couple of societies morphed over time. I think a lot of them are defunct at this point. Maybe not nationally, but at this specific location. Mr. Andre Cody comes to mind. Andre A. Cody, actually. Very, very involved in the community, was a pharmacist. He unfortunately passed at a relatively young age, at 47. He made front page news of the Sentinel, or Fitchburg.
Where was his pharmacy located?
I believe it was on Fairmont Street. I actually found a newspaper article, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but somebody actually bought it a year or so after, and they were the new pharmacist in town.
Yeah.
Cleophas Forrest, he's another big name. You see every single organization just about the Dramatic Union, the Foresters, Franco Foresters. They started off as the Ancient Order of Foresters, then they changed to the Foresters of America, and then they became the Franco-American Foresters when they broke away from the Foresters organization.
Yeah.
So he was, I think, involved in all three organizations. Also the St. Joseph's Union, I believe he was involved in. There's just he's a heavy hitter on the organizations. I believe too, I think I was telling Susan, he was also a school janitor, if I have the right person.
That's right.
Not that matters. I mean, he was obviously a smart person and involved in a lot of things. I'm trying to remember another one that I see.
Well, there was Napoleon Duchesne.
Napoleon Duchesne, yeah, we can't forget him. He did real estate, I believe. Am I get the right one?
Yeah, I took some pictures recently in Cleghorn, and I'm going to check where his house was because I saw some massive houses.
He's actually, I think the last time I was here, when I was actually looking through the directories, if again we're talking about the same Duchesne because it was LM. didn't he have like a couple of other letters with his name?
Yes, I
Like
think so.
LMN Deschamps, whatever the
Oh, probably,
something like
yeah.
that. I think he was actually neighbor to my 2 times great grandparents who lived on Daniel Street. He was boarding, but he had his properties that he owned. But I think it was 50 Daniels and they were 52, 54 Daniels, so they were literally next door to each other.
Oh, good, thank you. I'll look at where I took a picture, because I think...
And it's also interesting, he's also on my 2 times great grandparents, I believe he's the petitioner for his naturalization papers on his papers, because it had to have like somebody, and I believe it says Element Deschamps was somebody that spoke for him too. There wasn't just the French Naturalization Club, there was actually 1 or 2 others. There was an Acadian club, which was the Evangeline, I can't remember the word off the top of my head, but there was some sort of second naturalization club besides the French naturalization club. I also wanted to back up to Andre. He was also very, I think he was the person that brought the, what was it called? The New England Volunteer Guard, which was associated with the Guard to Honor at St. Joseph's. I don't remember their affiliation. They had somehow connected with each other. But he was instrumental in kind of attaching that to the Guard of Honor. After World War I happened, a lot of those guys were members in that group, and it kind of sounds like that's when that kind of fizzled, that people were kind of sick of marching, and they've been to war, some of those folks died, and I think I haven't found any concrete paperwork, but it kind of, there's one article that said that they were looking and regrouping, so it kind of insinuates that was maybe a turning point where that went away, and then there seems like there's a little lapse where there's absolutely no drum and bugle corps or any military band or anything, and then they pick up another article where I think it's the St. Joseph's. I can't remember. There's like 3 or 4 drum groups, 5 drum groups. I think that was the next one. I could be totally wrong off the top of my head with that, but it did reference in the article that Fitchburg had been, or Cleghorn specifically, had been without some sort of a military drum corps or something to that effect.
Really?
For a couple of years. And then there was a priest at St. Joseph's that kind of kindled the fire again, that they reinstated the next group. I haven't been able to connect that one little bridge of when they ended and when the next one picked up. So
That's a really interesting point. I never thought of that, but you see that in all different kinds of groups. Like, I mean, like even if you think about the Boy Scouts and the, whatever they were called in England, the Boy Guards or whatever they were, that they had different levels of emphasis on marching around in sort of a militaristic approach.
well, I think with that
versus
affiliation
not.
with the volunteers, volunteer French Canadian, I forget what the exact term is. I have it in my stuff,
Yeah.
but I think they brought the military part of it. I mean, yes, you march in whatever in a drum and bugle corps, you know, everybody's going in unison and that sort of thing, but I think that brought that military aspect to it. And your person you're researching, Mr. Boucher, was also involved in the Guard of Honor group there.
Yeah, he was. It's interesting, but I do think you're right in some respects about World War One. I think the experience that people had there, when they came home, they
We're done with
they had their fill with
marching and
well, and they also saw the
darker side.
the human tragedy of war. And I think they really started to back away from that.
Yep.
Escalate.
It's kind of like I said, insinuated in that article, and then there's a lapse of time, and then you see like, oh, there's a lapse of time we haven't had anybody, so something happened between that time frame. I haven't, like I said, been able to specifically find an article pointing, okay, this is when it, ceased to exist, but it kind of insinuates that.